Terrorism. For a word that is so often used, very little is understood of what it really means. So what does terrorism mean to you? This is Inside Terrorism Decoded. The word terrorism was first popularized during the French Revolution. At the time, it had a decidedly positive connotation. The French Reign of Terror was an instrument of governance established at the end of the 18th century by the new revolutionary state. It was designed to consolidate the government's power by hunting down counter-revolutionaries. People's tribunals or courts were set up and given extraordinary powers to arrest, judge, and execute those convicted of treason. In fact, during its original context, terrorism was closely associated with democracy and virtue. Throughout history, governments have employed terror tactics to coerce populations into submission. In Cambodia, for example, 2 million people were killed by the black shirts under Pol Pot till the Viet Cong ousted his regime in 1979 and installed Hun Sen. Tens of millions were killed as a result of policies enacted by Mao Zedong, the founder of Communist China. And in Syria, where the regime of Bashar al-Assad has executed tens of thousands of opposition activists at state-run facilities. State-sponsored terrorism in many instances elicits a reaction in the form of oppositional terrorism. One example of non-state actors who have used terrorism is Osama bin Laden. But to understand why this is, we need to go back further than the 9/11 attacks, which were arguably the biggest televised attacks in history. We need to go back to the Munich Olympics of 1972 and the killing of Israeli athletes by Palestinian extremists. It was the first time that a terrorist attack was broadcast live across the world, as cameras covering the games brought images of bruised and beaten athletes and their captors to global audiences. The tragedy was a success in terms of bringing the Palestinian cause to the world. The Palestinians were now a force to be reckoned with, and their movement demanding global concern. The 1972 Munich Olympics internationalized terrorism and legitimized violence as an effective means to highlight a political struggle. Soon after Munich, terrorist organizations such as the Armenian extremist Asala came into being and started carrying out audacious and highly publicized attacks on Turkish diplomats. Asala founder Hage Pagopyan trained alongside Palestinian extremists like Badi Haddad and George Habash, representing Iraqi and Syrian interests respectively. Another group that was training alongside Asala and the Palestinians often at Syrian training camps was the PKK. The violent movement started in the late 1970s and was headed by Abdullah Öcalan till his capture by Turkish forces in 1999 based on US and Israeli intelligence. Terrorism is a word with intrinsically negative connotations that is generally applied to one's enemies or opponents. What is considered terrorism thus seems to depend on one's point of view. Use of the term implies a moral judgment, and if one side can successfully attach the terrorist label to an opponent, then it has indirectly persuaded others to adopt its moral viewpoint. So the decision to call someone or a group as a terrorist organization is subjective. If one identifies with the victim of the violence, for example, then the act is terrorism. If one, however, identifies with the perpetrator, then the violent act is not considered a terrorist act. Tell us what you think. Leave your comments and suggestions on TRT World's YouTube page. I'm on Twitter at Ali_Mustafa.